July 8, 1944, Northern Saipan. Private First Class Guy Gabaldon, an 18-year-old Mexican-American Marine weighing barely 123 lb, approached a cave complex where hundreds of Japanese soldiers and civilians had taken shelter. What happened next would become the most extraordinary, single-handed rescue operation in Pacific War history. One Marine would convince over 800 Japanese soldiers and civilians to surrender in a single day, and by war's end would be personally responsible for the capture of approximately 500 enemy personnel who had been told that surrender meant torture and death. The mathematics of salvation were being written, not in battle plans but in the space between propaganda and truth, between what these civilians had been told about Americans and what one young Marine would demonstrate through his knowledge of Japanese language and culture. Guy Gabaldon's journey to Saipan began in the Boyle Heights neighborhood of East Los Angeles, 400 mi away. Born March 22, 1926, one of 7 children in a Mexican-American family struggling through the Depression. His life changed at age 12 when he moved in with the Nano family, Japanese Americans who had taken in the young boy. For several years, Gabaldon lived with the Nanos, learning Japanese language and culture. Though never formally adopted, he became part of their family, eating Japanese food, speaking Japanese at home, learning not just the language but the culture, the concept of honor, the importance of family, the subtle social dynamics that governed Japanese interaction. Then came December 7, 1941. Within 4 months, Executive Order 966 forced the Nanos and 120,000 other Japanese Americans into internment camps. The Nano family was sent to Heart Mountain, Wyoming, one of 14,000 Japanese Americans confined there from 1942 to 1945. Gabaldon watched as the family that had cared for him was forced from their home. At 17, Gabaldon enlisted in the Marines, motivated both by patriotism and a desire to use his unique language skills. His Japanese wasn't perfect, but it was conversational, learned not in a classroom but at a dinner table, not from textbooks but from daily life. By March 1944, Private Gabaldon was assigned to Headquarters and Service Company, 2nd Marine Division, a scout and observer role that would utilize his language skills. His unit was preparing for Operation Forager, the invasion of the Marana Islands, where 30,000 Japanese troops and unknown thousands of Japanese civilians waited on Saipan. Military intelligence painted a grim picture. The Japanese military had distributed grenades to families, taught children to attack Americans, told mothers that Marines were recruited from prisons, and would torture anyone captured. Propaganda depicted Americans as demons who would rape women and eat children. The stage was set for mass civilian casualties. On June 15, 1944, Gabaldon went ashore at Saipan with the invasion force. The battle would last until July 9th, with American forces gradually pushing Japanese military and civilians northward on the island. What distinguished Gabaldon from other Marines was not his combat prowess, but his unauthorized nighttime missions. According to his Navy Cross citation and Marine Corps records, Gabaldon began operating independently against orders, slipping away from his unit at night to approach Japanese positions alone. His method was unorthodox but effective. He would approach caves and bunkers where Japanese soldiers and civilians hid, calling out in Japanese that he was alone and unarmed, that they would be treated well if they surrendered. His first success came early in the campaign. Approaching a cave at night, he sat outside and began speaking in conversational Japanese about food, about safety, about the treatment prisoners were receiving. After hours of patient talking, several Japanese soldiers emerged and surrendered. Word of his success spread through his unit, though his commanding officers were initially skeptical of his methods. Marine Corps records show that Gabaldon's approach differed fundamentally. From standard military interpreters who used bullhorns to demand surrender in formal military Japanese, Gabaldon spoke colloquially, respectfully, using the language patterns and cultural knowledge he'd learned from the Nanos. The climactic moment of Gabaldon's war came on July 8, 1944. By this date, American forces had pushed remaining Japanese forces and civilians into northern Saipan. The situation was desperate. Mass civilian suicides had already begun at what would become known as Suicide Cliff and Banzai Cliff, where hundreds of Japanese civilians, convinced that capture meant torture, threw themselves and their children into the sea. According to the National Museum of the Marine Corps and Gabaldon's Navy Cross, citation, on July 8th, Gabaldon approached a large concentration of Japanese in caves and bunkers. The exact location and specific conversations are not documented in primary sources, but the outcome is verified. Gabaldon returned to American lines with 87 prisoners, a mixture of soldiers and civilians. This single day's capture represents one of the largest surrenders to an individual soldier in U.S. military history. Marine Corps intelligence officers, including Colonel Walter Lear, Colonel John Schwaber, and Major James High, would later verify these numbers on the 1957 television program, This Is Your Life. The extraordinary nature of Gabaldon's achievements led to both recognition and skepticism. Captain John Schwab recommended him for the Medal of Honor on July 15, 1944, just days after the mass surrender. However, General Holland Smith, commanding general of the expeditionary troops, downgraded the recommendation. The citation that accompanied his eventual Navy Cross reads, "Working alone in the front lines, Private First Class, Gabaldon daringly entered enemy caves, pillboxes, buildings, and jungle brush, frequently in the face of hostile fire, and succeeded not only in obtaining vital military information, but in capturing well over 1,000 enemy civilians and troops." However, Lieutenant Robert B. Schick, a Marine Japanese language officer who served on Saipan, later expressed skepticism about some of Gabaldon's claims, calling him a relentless self-promoter. This criticism highlights the difficulty in verifying the exact details of Gabaldon's actions, which often occurred at night alone without witnesses. Gabaldon's successes must be understood within the brutal context of the Saipan battle. The island saw some of the Pacific War's worst, fighting with over 3,000 American deaths and virtually the entire Japanese garrison of 30,000 killed. Most tragically, an estimated 22,000 Japanese civilians died, many by suicide. The mass civilian suicides at Saipan shocked American forces. Mothers threw their children off cliffs before jumping themselves. Entire families detonated grenades together. Japanese military propaganda had convinced civilians that American capture would result in torture, rape, and cannibalism. Against this backdrop, Gabaldon's ability to convince any Japanese to surrender was remarkable. His success suggests that cultural knowledge and linguistic ability could overcome even the most intense propaganda. Every person he convinced to surrender was one fewer casualty in a battle that was already claiming terrible numbers of civilian lives. Late in the Saipan campaign, Gabaldon was wounded by machine gun fire while conducting one of his solo missions. His Navy Cross citation notes these wounds, but doesn't specify the exact date or location. Despite his injuries, he continued his operations until evacuated for medical treatment. After recovering, Gabaldon returned to duty and participated in additional Pacific operations, though none would match the scale of his Saipan achievements. His total captures for the war are officially listed as well over 1,000 enemy civilians and troops, with most sources citing approximately 1,500 total captures. Gabaldon initially received the Silver Star for his actions on Saipan. This was upgraded to the Navy Cross on November 23, 1960, making it the highest decoration awarded to a Marine of Mexican descent during World War II. The Navy Cross is the Navy and Marine Corps' second highest decoration for valor, exceeded only by the Medal of Honor. Multiple campaigns have sought to upgrade Gabaldon's Navy Cross to the Medal of Honor. Los Angeles, Mayor Antonio Villaosa, the Hispanic Medal of Honor Society, and various congressional representatives have led these efforts. All have been rejected officially because of time limitations on reconsidering awards, though some suggest reluctance to recognize unconventional warfare methods. The controversy extends beyond medals. Some historians question whether one man could have achieved such numbers. Others point out that Gabaldon's methods, operating alone at night without witnesses, make verification difficult. Yet Marine Corps intelligence officers did verify his achievements, and his Navy Cross citation represents official military recognition of his accomplishments. In 1960, Hollywood released Hell to Eternity, allegedly based on Gabaldon's story. The film starred Jeffrey Hunter, a 6'F tall, blue-eyed actor, as Gabaldon, effectively erasing his Mexican-American identity. The movie transformed his patient negotiations into action hero dramatics, his cultural understanding into American swagger. Gabaldon himself was reportedly disappointed with the film, which took considerable liberties with his story. The Hollywood version emphasized combat over communication, violence over patience, turning a story about cultural bridge building into a conventional war movie. The film's distortions would shape public perception of Gabaldon's achievements for decades. In 1990, Gabaldon published his autobiography, Saipan, Suicide Island, later republished as America Betrayed. The book provides his personal account of his wartime experiences, though historians note that memoirs, written decades after events, must be evaluated carefully for accuracy. In his book, Gabaldon emphasized that his success came from treating Japanese soldiers and civilians as human beings rather than enemies, from understanding their culture rather than just their language, from patience rather than force. He described sitting for hours outside caves talking about food, family, and safety until fear gave way to trust. After the war, Gabaldon returned to civilian life, eventually settling in Saipan for 20 years, where he started a fishing business. He married and had 11 children, 9 of whom survived to adulthood. He spent decades speaking at schools and events about his experiences, emphasizing the importance of cultural understanding. On July 7, 2006, Los Angeles Mayor Antonio Villaosa honored Gabaldon at City Hall, recognizing his contributions to American military history. Just weeks later, on August 31, 2006, Gabaldon died of heart disease in Old Town, Florida at age 80. He was buried, with full military honors, at Arlington National Cemetery. Lane Nano, one of Gabaldon's adoptive brothers from the family that taught him Japanese, served with the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed almost entirely of Japanese-American soldiers. The 442nd became the most decorated unit in U.S. military history for its size and length of service, earning 9,486 Purple Hearts and 21 Medals of Honor. The parallel service of Gabaldon and Lane Nano, one using Japanese language skills to save Japanese lives, the other proving Japanese-American loyalty through combat in Europe, represents a unique chapter in American military history. Both men served with distinction, while their Japanese-American family remained confined in an internment camp. Lane Nano survived the war and lived until April 28, 2005, maintaining contact with Gabaldon throughout their lives. Their shared story illustrates the complexity of World War II, where racial prejudice at home coexisted with heroism abroad. While specific influence on military doctrine is difficult to document, one military source notes that Gabaldon's efforts have become standard teaching. Examples for U.S. military psychological opérations personnelles, his demonstrations that cultural knowledge could achieve tactical success, influenced thinking about language training and cultural preparation for military personnel. The Marine Corps has incorporated lessons from Gabaldon's experience into training programs, though specific manuals or policies directly citing his influence are not publicly available. His example is used to illustrate the value of language skills and cultural understanding in military operations. Modern military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan have demonstrated the continued relevance of Gabaldon's approach. Units with embedded interpreters who understand not just language but culture have consistently reported better outcomes in civilian interactions. The principle Gabaldon demonstrated that understanding enemy culture can be as valuable as firepower remains valid in contemporary conflicts. Historians evaluate Gabaldon's achievements within the broader context of the Pacific War. The Battle for Saipan was one of the war's bloodiest, with casualty rates exceeding 90% for Japanese military forces. Against this backdrop, Gabaldon's ability to convince any Japanese to surrender was extraordinary. Dr. Gordon W. Prange, the noted Pacific War historian, included Gabaldon's story in his studies of individual heroism in World War. That's while noting the difficulty in verifying specific details of Gabaldon's claims. Prang acknowledged that the Marine Corps' official recognition through The Navy Cross validates the essential truth of his achievements. The challenge in assessing Gabaldon's legacy lies in separating verified facts from later embellishments. The core achievement, capturing approximately 1,500 Japanese soldiers and civilians through persuasion rather than force, is documented in military records. The specific details of how he accomplished this remain less clear. The documented statistics of Gabaldon's service tell their own story. Verified captures well over 1,000 according to Navy Cross citation. Approximately 1,500 according to Marine Corps Museum. Single-day record 87 prisoners on July 8, 1944. Verified by Marine Corps records. Duration of service: Saipan campaign from June 15 to July 9, 1944. Wounds received: machine gun fire during late campaign operations. Final rank: Private First Class, promoted during service. Primary decoration: Navy Cross, awarded November 23, 1960. Secondary decoration: Silver Star, later upgraded to Navy Cross. Purple Heart for wounds received in action. These numbers, while impressive, only hint at the human dimension of Gabaldon's achievements. Each capture represented a life saved. Japanese soldiers and civilians who survived the war because one Marine chose persuasion over violence. Gabaldon's success demonstrates principles now recognized in psychological operations. His approach incorporated several key elements. First, he operated from a position of apparent vulnerability, approaching alone, announcing himself, claiming to be unarmed. These actions contradicted Japanese propaganda about American brutality. His small stature, 5'4" in 123 lali, made him less physically threatening than the demon-like Americans described in propaganda. Second, he used familiar language patterns, not the formal Japanese of military communications, but the conversational Japanese of daily life. This familiarity suggested genuine cultural knowledge rather than military phrasebook learning. Third, he demonstrated patience. Military records indicate he would spend hours outside caves talking continuously, allowing fear to subside gradually. This patience contradicted the image of aggressive, impatient Americans promoted by Japanese propaganda. Fourth, he offered dignity in surrender. Rather than demanding unconditional capitulation, he framed surrender as a means to protect families, to survive for Japan's future reconstruction. This reframing provided psychological space for surrender without complete loss of honor. To understand Gabaldon's achievement, one must understand the intensity of Japanese propaganda on Saipan. Military authorities had told civilians that Americans would torture all captured men, rape all women, eat children. Literally, propaganda depicted Americans as cannibals, desecrate Japanese bodies, destroy Japanese culture. This propaganda was reinforced by military police who forced civilians toward cliffs, by officers who distributed grenades to families, by constant repetition that death was preferable to capture. Civilian suicides were framed as martyrdom for the emperor. Against this wall of propaganda, Gabaldon's ability to convince anyone to surrender seems almost impossible. Yet he succeeded, repeatedly through patient demonstration, that the propaganda was false. His very presence, a small young Marine speaking Japanese, approaching alone, contradicted everything civilians had been told about Americans. Gabaldon's experience offers lessons still relevant today. In conflicts where civilian populations are caught between combatants, cultural understanding can prevent casualties more effectively than firepower. His methods suggest several principles. Language skills must include cultural knowledge to be effective. Individual initiative can achieve results that formal military operations cannot. Patience and respect can overcome even intense propaganda. Treating enemies as potential future allies can create unexpected opportunities. Small unit or individual operations can sometimes succeed where large-scale operations fail. These lessons have been applied with varying success in recent conflicts. In Iraq and Afghanistan, units that invested in cultural training and language skills reported better outcomes in civilian interactions. However, the systematic application of Gabaldon's approach remains limited by military doctrine that prioritizes force protection and conventional operations. The question of verification haunts Gabaldon's story. Lieutenant Robert B. Sheik's characterization of him as a relentless self-promoter suggests some skepticism about his claims. The nature of his operations alone at night without witnesses makes independent verification difficult. Yet several factors support the essential truth of his achievements. Official military recognition. The Navy Cross. Citation represents formal military acknowledgement of his accomplishments. Intelligence officer verification. 3 Marine intelligence officers publicly verified his capture numbers in 1957 contemporary documentation. Marine Corps records from 1944 document the July 8th capture of 87 prisoners. Logical consistency. His Japanese language skills are documented, as is the fact that many Japanese did surrender on Saipan despite propaganda. The exact details of specific operations may be unverifiable, but the overall achievement appears solid. Gabaldon convinced large numbers of Japanese to surrender through persuasion rather than force, a feat documented in military records and recognized with one of the nation's highest military honors. Gabaldon's story represents more than military achievement. It demonstrates the power of cultural bridge building in extreme circumstances. His ability to speak Japanese wasn't just linguistic. It was cultural. He understood concepts of honor, family, and shame that shaped Japanese thinking. He could speak not just to Japanese soldiers, but as someone who understood their worldview. This cultural bridging came from his unique background. A Mexican-American raised partially in a Japanese-American household. This multicultural experience, far from being a liability, became his greatest military asset. He could navigate between cultures in ways that traditionally trained military interpreters could not. His story challenges conventional military thinking that prioritizes firepower and technology. In the Battle for Saipan, one teenager with language skills saved more lives than entire battalions with superior weapons. His success suggests that military forces that reflect America's diversity possess advantages beyond traditional metrics of military power. Guy Gabaldon's legacy extends beyond his wartime achievements. He demonstrated that individual initiative, cultural understanding, and moral courage could achieve seemingly impossible results. His story offers several enduring lessons. First, diversity strengthens military capability. Gabaldon's Mexican-American background and Japanese cultural knowledge created unique operational possibilities. Modern military forces that embrace diversity gain similar advantages. Second, unconventional approaches can achieve conventional objectives. Gabaldon violated military protocol by operating alone, yet achieved results that conventional operations couldn't match. Innovation and flexibility remain crucial in military operations. Third, treating enemies as humans rather than targets can create unexpected opportunities. Gabaldon's respectful approach to Japanese soldiers and civilians opened possibilities that aggressive tactics would have foreclosed. Fourth, individual courage can have strategic impact. One Marine's actions saved approximately 4,500 lives and demonstrated that American forces could show mercy even in brutal combat. This had implications beyond Saipan, potentially influencing Japanese views of Americans. While celebrating Gabaldon's achievements, historical accuracy requires acknowledging limitations and controversies. Some specific claims remain unverified by independent sources. His own accounts written decades later may contain embellishments. The lack of witnesses to many operations makes verification difficult. His self-promotion activities after the war may have affected his credibility. The exact influence on military doctrine remains undocumented. These limitations don't negate his achievements, but remind us that historical heroes are complex, figures whose stories often grow in the telling. The verified core of Gabaldon's story, the Navy Cross citation, the Marine Corps records, the intelligence officer confirmations, remains remarkable. Even without embellishment, Gabaldon's story gains deeper meaning when considered against Saipan's terrible human cost. Of approximately 30,000 Japanese military personnel, fewer than 1,000 survived. Of approximately 22,000 Japanese civilians, thousands died by suicide. American forces suffered over 3,000 killed and 10,000 wounded. Every person Gabaldon convinced to surrender was subtracted from these terrible statistics. His 500 captures represent 500 people who lived instead of died, who returned to families instead of becoming casualties, who participated in post-war reconstruction instead of becoming war dead. This human dimension transcends military metrics. Behind each capture was a human being, someone's son, husband, father, brother. Behind each civilian saved was a family preserved children who grew up with parents. Communities that retained members. The ripple effects of lives saved extend through generations. After the war, Gabaldon's life took various turns. He worked as a civilian interpreter during the occupation of Japan. He later moved to Saipan, where he lived for 20 years, running a fishing business and maintaining connections with the island where he'd made his mark. His decision to live on Saipan suggests a deep connection to the place and possibly to the people he'd saved, though specific reunions with saved individuals aren't documented. His long residence on the island indicates ongoing engagement with its history and people. In his later years, Gabaldon became an advocate for Hispanic recognition in military history. He spoke at schools, veterans events, and community gatherings, sharing his story and emphasizing themes of cultural understanding and individual initiative. His advocacy contributed to broader recognition of Hispanic contributions to American military success. Gabaldon's burial at Arlington National Cemetery represents official recognition of his service. Arlington's strict eligibility requirements mean that his interment there confirms military acknowledgement of his extraordinary contributions. His grave has become a site of pilgrimage for those interested in Hispanic military history and unconventional warfare. Various organizations have honored Gabaldon's memory. Hispanic veterans groups cite him as an example of Latino military excellence. Marine Corps units studying psychological operations reference his techniques. Language training programs use his story to illustrate the tactical value of cultural knowledge. However, unlike some war heroes, Gabaldon has no major memorial, no ship named after him, no permanent museum exhibition. His story remains relatively unknown outside military history circles. This relative obscurity may reflect discomfort with unconventional warfare methods or lingering skepticism about his achievements. In an era of asymmetric warfare, cultural conflict, and civilian casualties, Gabaldon's approach offers relevant lessons. Modern conflicts in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and elsewhere demonstrate that military success requires more than firepower. Understanding enemy culture, building trust with civilian populations, and providing alternatives to violence remain crucial. Counterinsurgency doctrine now emphasizes many principles. Gabaldon demonstrated intuitively the importance of language skills, cultural knowledge, patient engagement, and treating potential enemies as potential allies. His success on Saipan prefigured modern thinking about population-centric warfare, yet military institutions still struggle to implement these lessons systematically. Language training remains limited, cultural knowledge superficial, and conventional kinetic operations prioritized over patient engagement. Gabaldon's example suggests possibilities that military organizations have yet to fully realize. Central to Gabaldon's success was his understanding of Japanese concepts of honor. He didn't demand dishonorable surrender, but offered honorable alternatives, protecting families, preserving life for future service to Japan, choosing life without abandoning dignity. This nuanced understanding of honor allowed Japanese soldiers and civilians to surrender without complete psychological destruction. This aspect of his approach deserves special attention. Military forces often misunderstand enemy concepts of honor, leading to unnecessary casualties. Gabaldon's ability to work within Japanese honor frameworks rather than against them created possibilities for peaceful resolution that conventional military thinking would have missed. His own honor is also noteworthy. Operating alone without witnesses, he could have exaggerated his achievements without detection. That Marine Corps intelligence verified his claims suggests essential honesty, even if specific details grew in later telling. Guy Gabaldon died having saved approximately 500 enemy lives through individual initiative, cultural knowledge, and physical courage. His Navy Cross citation stands as official recognition of extraordinary heroism in combat. His story demonstrates that warfare's greatest heroes aren't always those who kill the most enemies, but sometimes those who save the most lives. The boy from Boyle Heights, who learned Japanese from his adoptive family, became a Marine who used that knowledge to prevent massacre on a Pacific island. His transformation from street kid to war hero to advocate for recognition represents a distinctly American story. Multicultural background creating unique capabilities, individual initiative achieving extraordinary results, and lifetime commitment to sharing lessons learned. Whatever controversies surround specific details, the core truth remains. Guy Gabaldon saved more enemy lives through persuasion than perhaps any other individual soldier in American military history. On blood-soaked Saipan, where death seemed the only option for Japanese soldiers and civilians, one small Marine offered life and was believed. When the myth-making and controversy are stripped away, Guy Gabaldon's verified achievements remain extraordinary. A Mexican-American teenager who learned Japanese from his adoptive family used those skills to save approximately 500 enemy lives on Saipan. Military records confirm his mass capture of 807 prisoners on July 8, 1944. His Navy Cross citation validates his overall achievements. These facts alone make Gabaldon one of World War II's most unique heroes. Not a conventional warrior who killed many enemies, but a cultural bridge builder who saved enemies from death. Not a powerful fighter who dominated through strength, but a small young man who succeeded through understanding. Not a traditional military interpreter who demanded surrender, but a culturally fluent negotiator who offered dignity in defeat. His story reminds us that America's strength comes not just from military power, but from diversity that creates unexpected capabilities. A Mexican-American boy raised partially by Japanese Americans became uniquely equipped to save Japanese lives in American uniform. This complexity, multicultural identity creating military advantage, represents possibilities that conventional thinking often misses. The Pied Piper of Saipan earned his nickname not through fiction, but through documented fact. On an island where propaganda and fear drove thousands to suicide, one Marine's patient voice and familiar language offered alternative to death. That approximately 4,500 people accepted his offer despite everything they'd been told about. American brutality testifies to the power of cultural understanding over violence. Guy Gabaldon proved that in warfare's darkest moments, individual choice and cultural knowledge can save lives that seem inevitably lost. His legacy isn't just the number of captures, but the demonstration that understanding enemies as humans creates possibilities that seeing them only as targets forecloses. In the brutal arithmetic of war, he chose addition of lives saved over subtraction of lives taken. This verified legacy documented in military records confirmed by intelligence, officers recognized with high decoration, stands as testament to unconventional heroism. The exact details of specific operations may remain unverifiable, but the essential truth persists. On Saipan in 1944, Guy Gabaldon saved more enemy lives through individual initiative than perhaps any other American soldier in history. That achievement, stripped of embellishment and mythology, remains worthy of the honor, study, and remembrance it has received. The boy from Boyle Heights became a Marine hero, not through conventional prowess, but through cultural bridge building that saved lives on both sides of war's divide. In that verified truth lies a legacy worth preserving and lessons worth learning.